and we will now go for the next talk with Professor Matthias Finger. If you can give the host capability to Professor Finger.
It's done, no?
Okay, so yes, Professor Finger, we can hear you and we can see your presentation. I would like to give an introduction about you, and then we can start. So we are very happy to have you here, Professor Finger. Professor Finger holds a PhD in education and another PhD in political science. He is currently Professor Emeritus at Ecole Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne and also Professor at Istanbul Technical University. His research focuses on the regulation of network industries, governance of large socio-technical systems, and infrastructure policy, business government relations. So today, Professor Finger will present the transformation of public transport over the past 30 years. So without further ado, Professor Finger, you are welcome to begin your talk.
Okay, thank you very much. Just scream if there is a problem. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. From the audience, I see that you're very international, which I'm very familiar with. So I will talk about. It will be very complementary to Professor Gericke's speech, because I'm taking the big picture, some sort of historical view, a systemic view. I'm at the end of my career, so I'm looking a little bit back over all these things. The historical approach is, I'll talk about the liberalization of transport, then add some conceptual elements, the dynamics, the technological dynamics that has ensued from this, then the growing efforts to decarbonize and now recently to digitalize. But, while listening to the previous speech, I added a slide from the one I sent you before. I'll send you the new version. And I don't want this to be self-promotion, but I want you to understand, sort of how I have evolved into the way I look at things today. Yes, I'm a political scientist, but not the very typical one. I have never really worked in the this abstract theory of political science. I've always been interested in the practical questions of managing things. So in the beginning, I was in public management. I started my career at Syracuse University in the US. I'm just mentioning this because this was it's a think tank of the Democrats. And so it was, more international, but management. And then I came back to Switzerland and I worked on the infrastructures. First, I was a professor of public enterprises, state-owned enterprises, utilities, they would say in the US. And we have a lot of them in Europe. And then I moved to EPFL, which is a purely engineering school. I was the only political scientist among 350 professors. All of them were engineers, and there were a few economists. And my topic is deregulation, liberalization, privatization, re-regulation of network industries, infrastructures. And I was dealing with transport in the broad sense, and that's what I will talk about, energy and communications, telecom, postal services, and water. So the basic infrastructures upon which a society develops. And I was practical. I mean, it's an academic job, but I have held practical jobs, and that might be, I was an energy regulator for 12 years, regulating electricity markets. In Germany, this is Bundesnetzagentur. And then I was a regulator of railways, the railway sector. In Germany, it's the same organization, but in most other countries, it's separate. And from there, I started in 2010 to work with the Florence School of Regulation, which is the EU. So a lot of what I say is quite influenced by EU policy, because much of what is being done in these infrastructures is actually driven by the EU. Deregulation, re-regulation. And in Florence, all we do, I continue, we organize workshops with the European Commission, the regulators, the companies, the ministries, and then discuss about regulatory policies for transport in Europe. Okay, so that's the historical approach. I just mentioned this Istanbul thing because it is an opening. I see many of you are from emerging countries, and Turkey is a typical emerging country. We're basically replicating the same thing as we do in Florence for the emerging countries out of Istanbul. So it's Central Asia, Middle East, Russia, these same kind of problems. Now, since retiring last year, I continue to work for digitalization, the regulation of digitalization, digital policies, very much with the EU. And basically here, I think there is a point to be made here. As you know, Switzerland is not part of the EU, but basically does everything that the EU does. So we are trying to understand all these digitalization efforts of the EU and what do they mean for a country like Switzerland. And finally, I added this because Professor Gericke mentioned very much urban. And if you have a chance, go and have a look at this IGLUS program, Innovative Governance of Large Urban Systems, iglus.org. It's an executive program where we bring together cities, city managers, the companies that are operating in the system about how to govern the urban systems. Of course, transport is a big portion of it, but we also have energy, communication, water, waste. So from that, you see, I have a very comprehensive global approach, and maybe not always going into all the details. So let me go into the history. The point of departure, I would say, is before 1990 worldwide, where the old infrastructures, the old physical infrastructures are typically national. It's different in the US. The US is a different story, but the rest of the world is more or less everything the same. National public infrastructures in post, telecom, air, electricity, water is always local. And and they are historically vertically integrated monopolies, state SOEs, state-owned enterprises, or Germany. There is a big difference between the centralized countries and the federalist countries. And in the federalist countries, about 25% of the countries in the world, but big ones. Germany, Brazil, US, India, you have these monopolies, the state-owned enterprises on the regional level, not necessarily on the national level, okay? But it doesn't change anything. They are integrated, they provide everything, the infrastructure and the services. And if we look just at transport, it is a very sectoral modal approach. There is rail, and that's one office, one company, not talking to the rest. Then there is urban public transport, buses, things like that. Taxis are something else. Trucks are something else. Road is something else. Usually this is very sectorally organized. We don't have a systemic view of the transport modes, okay? Only now, and I like the presentation of Professor Gericke, in the city, of course, all these things come together. But historically, at the national level, we planned them separately. We planned highways, and then we planned rail, and we never connected these things. They were done by different people, different companies, different financing sources, different policies, okay? So that's where we come from, an integrated, very much modal approach, okay? The reason why I insist here is because with decarbonization, climate change, with digitalization, this sectoral approach is challenged, okay? And I'll come back at the very end. The users, they don't have this sectoral approach. They want to go from A to B. They don't want to, decide, okay, which mode to take. So that's the history of it. Now, and that's where the Europe comes in. In the 1990s, the word you need to keep is the word unbundling, because we wanted the EU, but also the World Bank, the IMF in the emerging countries, wanted to introduce competition in these very monopolistic sectors, not just transport, everything, all the infrastructures, competition in water, competition in energy, competition in rail, competition in roads, things like that. And this was done basically, I'll come in the next slide. This was a policy measure, a regulatory, not a technological thing. Technology comes after, okay? And it was a decision. We are in the context of the late 80s, globalization, neoliberalism, market is good, government is bad. And why not have competition also in the infrastructures? And the most systematic approach on this is the EU, okay? Now you can say the EU is just the EU, but it's not true, because the model, how this was thought through, basically has been copied by the rest of the world. Okay, the Chinese do the same approach as the EU. The Indians do the same approach. The Brazilians. So it has, by virtue of its intellectual approach. Okay, so that's where we start. Now, just one slide on conceptualization. Basically, and I think the framework is valid beyond network industries, but I also apply. So we have institutional changes. And if I have to, I said I'm a political scientist, but my theoretical background is really institutional economics, okay? Institutions are rules. And over time, the rules change, okay? And in parallel, the technology changes, okay? And rules, you can have different approaches, market, government, some hybrid things, but basically it's an opposition between market and government. You can have rules at various levels. I already mentioned you have national rules, regional rules in the federal country, local rules now in the urban context, okay? And in technology, we have generic technology, energy technology, transport technology. Before we talked about drones, propulsion technologies. And then we have generic, we have the technologies that cut across everything, like digitalization that permeates absolutely everything. And I'll come back to that. So these two things evolve and they co-evolve. And ultimately, you would like to have some sort of coherence between both, okay? That, you know, you have, so the reason why I say this is because in the beginning, when we started to liberalize the network industries, this was just an idea, actually an ideology. Market is good, okay? So we open up the markets, we privatize in certain countries, but nobody was thinking about technology. Would technology follow? Is technology ready? Okay. I'll give you, how much competition do you think we have in the railway sector? Not that much. Okay. But this is the first industry we try to put competition, but the technology was not ready yet. Okay. So, and is not even ready today. But ideally, you want the rules to change, the technology to change, and then things evolve a bit. I'll explain in a little while the arrows open. Okay, so gradually you hope that industries will emerge. Before we had national monopolies controlling everything, we should have industries that a rail industry, an air transport industry, a water industry, an energy industry, mobility industry now, okay. And of course, you have actors always. And these I think it's important, that's my sociological piece to it. Of course, these things don't just happen, they don't fall from the sky. They're always actors that push for things, okay? Or they prevent things from happening. They fight against these changes. So you have institutional actors, governments, World Bank. I see many of you are from emerging countries. You have suffered a lot from the World Bank. These are actors, very powerful actors, or the IMF. Then we have technology actors, university like mine, we are technology actors. Actually, our business is to create spin-offs and startups and things like that then create industries. And then there are market actors, companies that take it up, that make a business out of it. And all this moves ahead. There must be business models, things like that. Okay, now let me move a little bit ahead in time. So this is the liberalization idea in the beginning. And so, as I said, in the beginning, the liberalization idea was just an institutional change. We unbundle. I didn't explain what that is. Basically, unbundling means how do you create competition? I always use rail because it's pedagogically very easy to understand. You have trains and you have tracks. They belong to the same country, same company. Okay. In Germany, still, it's Deutsche Bahn, owns both. Okay. Even though the EU has said those should be separate companies. Okay. So we want to create competition by unbundling them, by saying, okay, there is an infrastructure that is monopolistic, that the government can own it. And then there are trains that use the infrastructure. They should compete against each other. Okay. And that was an original institutional change, changing the rules. But as you can imagine, this is not my talk today, but changing these rules leads to other rules. Of course, and actually, as a result of the whole thing, we have more rules than before. Okay, but so unbundle, deregulate, and hope that by that a market will emerge and demand will pull. Consumers want to change trains, or they want to change planes, and it has worked in the airline industry. Maybe many of you are too young, but the airline industry in the beginning, we only had Lufthansa. We didn't have anything else. Okay. and now you have low costs and things like that. And so there is a market that has emerged. Okay. Now, my point here, and I go to the next, I prepared the next slide, is this has led, the change in rules has led to technological dynamism. And even though, one little critical word about economists, they did not think 1 minute about technology. They just thought we make market and then we have market. The consequence of it was that it triggered technological dynamics, okay? And I just put here automatization. We talked before, that's one. Digitalisation, even more. And I'll say one word at the end about that. But in every industry, we have technological innovation, basically as a result of that liberalism that was created. If you take energy, we have now smart meters, we have decentralized production, we have, and in every industry you can see, we have electric bicycles, we have, there is a lot of technological change that has resulted from that dynamism, okay? Now, the point I would like to make on this slide is that if you can see my pointer here, we have deregulated, now we have new technologies, but now the rules should also evolve a little bit. But there's a little problem here because institutions, we have institutionalized all these things. And actually, I always say there is technological innovation and then there is institutional innovation, which now should also happen and follow again. So institutional change, new technologies, which should change the rules, maybe have more global rules, maybe have more decentralized rules as a result of these changes. But changing these rules is not that easy, as you know. Politics is involved, resistance is involved, society is involved. And, and maybe just one word, give you a thought about criticism. Is this all going in the right direction? My slide presupposes that it is going in the right direction. But maybe you could also say why it was good before, okay? Okay, now let me go to decarbonization. Okay, so the context of this, I have 5 more minutes, right?
Yes, but actually the next session is delayed for 15 minutes. So if you would like to go longer,
I have 2 more slides. So or 2 or 3 more slides, not much. But okay, so let me come back here. So we started liberalization 1990s, 2010, 2005, something like this. This is the liberalization environment globally, okay? Not just in the EU. Just in the EU, the approach is different because we want to create a single European market, not just a market in Germany, a market for Europe, okay? In the emerging countries, it's the same thing. We want to open the markets. All these national companies should compete and open the market actually for Western companies and Northern companies. And so that goes, that move, and we trigger with this, we trigger technological dynamics. But then comes climate change. I mean, climate change is not that new. We have the first warning. I was just looking recently, we go back to 72, 68 even. But, at some point, there is a certain urgency of climate change and people take it up. And we have big decarbonization policies back in 2005 already at the EU level. Now, just in July, just the other day, last week, the Commission has presented the Fit for 55% of CO2 emission reduction by 2030. Okay, it was never that precise and never that urgent, but the first policies start already there. So the point I want to make, we have new rules on top of the competition rules, okay? They are added. We didn't stop competition. Actually, it can't be stopped anymore. The technology, the dynamics has taken on. So we have decarbonization policies, and these concern in the infrastructures, these concern energy production, but transport, because transport is one of the big users of fossil fuels, okay? So decarbonizing transport. And I don't want to go into details, and I don't want to go into the whole discussion whether deregulation, liberalization, and decarbonization are actually compatible. That's another discussion we could have. Just to say that in the EU's view, which is really the forerunner in thinking, okay? In the EU's view, decarbonization can be even better thanks to liberalization, okay? That's how they marry the whole thing. And at the end, I will show you how they marry even digitalization into this. But we have decarbonization, and that means now only focusing on the transport sector. Basically, that means three things. From the separate modes, that the policies that were looked at separately, and this, what I'm saying you here is really what we are working on in Florence with the European Commission. Instead of a sectoral approach to transport, we now need to have a multimodal approach to transport. So the EU is not against cars, but we should use the cars where they have something to offer, last mile, things like that. And trucks, we always think about passengers, but cargo is equally important. It's about 25% of all the movements, okay? So we should be multimodal. And the consequence of this, okay, so let me go back. We liberalize sector by sector, okay? Competition in trains, competition in urban public transport, competition in the trucks and things like that. Now we have to have a multimodal approach. How do you get your passenger from A to B using walking, the bicycle, the metro, the train, the taxi, things like that? And I think it's very difficult because institutionally now we have to change our framework, okay? We also have, and that is, so multimodality is the idea to be more efficient. Each mode should be used there where it is most efficient, okay? Modal shift is another level to this, because the train overall is more, especially the electrified trains, okay, are more decarbonized than the trucks and the cars. Therefore, we should transport passengers more on trains and metros than on buses and cars. We should transport cargo more on trains than on trucks, and also on inland waterways. I'm not going into that, but that's also some. Okay, so modal shift, multimodality, and the third world, of course, since we are in a market approach, okay? Remember, liberalization, market, okay? Now, the market is totally distorted, as you know. The trains cost very much. They are actually, nobody can make money on trains except on a few lines. The airplanes are very cheap. The trucks and the cars are also relatively cheap. So in order to create a level playing field among all these transport modes, we have to internalize the externalities, and then the price mechanism should tell you which is the optimal mode of transport, on not just the policy. Another very difficult thing to do, okay? But those are the three, those three words are the result of the decarbonization policies. They did not exist when we talked about liberalization, okay? internalization of externalities is a liberal approach to decarbonization, but where we try to marry these things. Okay, so now comes digitalization. That's my last thing. So there are three things: liberalization, decarbonization, digitalization, after each other. Digitalization comes a little bit later, 2010. We get, but the real major initiatives on regulating digitalization are only from last year. Most of the efforts of the European Commission in digitalization, if you are familiar with this, Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, AI Act, Data Act, Data Governance Act, all December 2020. Okay, so now we have these digitalization that comes in, and of course we try to fit it into the same thing. Okay. Liberalization plus decarbonization plus digitalization will deliver a sustainable future. Okay, why not? But the integration should still happen at some point. So let me say a few words about digitalization, and I'll stop after this and the next slide. So we have the traditional infrastructures, physical infrastructures, unbundled or not unbundled, it doesn't matter. And now on top of that, we add a digital layer. It's really, I think the important element here is the layered model, a physical layer, a digital layer. The digital layer is, those are words from me, duplication, mirroring. We reflect Abbildung in Germany. We duplicate the physical on the digital level, okay? And by doing so, we can better manage the physical, okay? You have an influence on that, and basically it's about efficiency. And so, we can, let me go back here, we can do better modal shift thanks to digitalization. You can say which is the optimal mode. The digital helps you to better manage the infrastructure. Okay, so at a purely technical level. Now, let me go to the last slide and let me explain. I mean, everybody's familiar now with mobility as a service and all that, but I want to put it into a little bit more conceptual framework. So historically, we have the different transport modes on the bottom here, separate. Each of them has their own client. Okay, the car industry has their clients, the train has their clients. You have different tickets. You cannot change from the bus to the train. You have to buy a new ticket, have to walk 50 meters because they didn't interoperate and all that. Wasn't planned like this. Okay, now comes digitalization. On that digital layer, all these modal things do no longer exist. You can mix data together from car use and walking and cycling, and you basically on the digital level you can create a layer where all these data are mixed together. Okay, the physical problem still exists. You still have to walk 50 meters if you get out of the metro and you want to take your taxi. Okay, but digitally we can have an app that shows you have to walk 50 meters. Okay, so the first thing, the consequences of this, as I said before, the first positive effect of this is clearly efficiency. And efficiency not just in operations, everyday operations, it's efficiency in maintenance, it's efficiency in planning. I think we can get more out of the infrastructures with less investments thanks to digitalization, and we should do that. That's a good evolution. Okay, on the basis of this digital layer, you now can also offer services, okay? All these apps. And the main point is that I think the main change, it doesn't show clearly on that slide because graphically I don't nearly know how to present it, but historically, the client is the client of the metro, the client of the tram, the client of the train, okay? Now, with digitalization, it's the client of the platform, okay? That has plenty of consequences. One is consequence that, you know, the platform, and we know, and I cannot go into detail here, but we know that these platforms, that's why I used the word old infrastructures before. In the infrastructures, we have network effects as economists. In the digital platforms, we have more network effects, okay? Not just direct network effects. The more users on both sides, the better it is for everybody. We have indirect network effects. We can sell publicity to everybody. We have algorithmic network effects. So this leads to the platforms becoming very monopolistic, okay? There is like the traditional infrastructures, but even more so, okay? So not much competition. So what do we do with all this competition idea that we had in the beginning, okay? Now we have maybe created competition down here, but on the platform level, no more competition, okay? Okay, now, third element, the value added, okay? Now I'm just taking an example, as you may know, Uber takes 20%, Airbnb is better. They take 20 to 30% for the platform, okay? Maybe justified, I don't know, but if you are a monopolist, you can basically take whatever you want. People have no more choice. You have to be on the platform. But my question here is not that. It's not criticism of, you know, techno-capitalism. My point here is this money that was made by the historical infrastructure operators that now goes to the platforms, how does it go back to the infrastructure? How do we make sure that the money is reinvested, is not just shifted to California, it goes back into the German roads, the European rail, the things like that, okay? Consequence, the governments have to pay more because the platforms take the margins of it, okay? And last element, intermodal competition, of course. Now the platform can play these different actors against each other, okay? So, and you don't know what the platform does, okay? And we have looked at this a little bit. The platform gives you the fastest ride from A to B is here. Is from the, you take the metro, then you take the bus, then you take the train, then you, what does the platform optimize? You have no idea. Maybe they don't get a good commission from the train company, so they will put you on the taxi. The platform is making decisions that have public policy character, especially in the public transport, that influences where people go, what mode of transport people take. And so the platform is not just, efficiency was quite neutral, but it's influencing the way that, and that now I'm coming to the cities, the city's mobility is somehow determined by the platforms. And you know, there are now good studies on comparing different platforms, how much time they give you, what prices they give you, where they put you, and there's a big variety in there. So I stop here with my presentation, just making publicity about these two new books on the rise of the digital platforms and the regulation of this. And then the other book is not even published yet on the digitalization of infrastructures. That's more a plea for the more efficient management of infrastructure. Sorry for having been too long, but I covered a big picture and I hope it made some sense for you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Finger. It was super interesting. We got many questions. I was informed that the next session is a little bit delayed, so we could extended talk, and it was great. So I addressed the questions of the participants. The first question is, what framework model would you recommend for India or developing country, if we put it that way?
The same. I don't see the difference, basically. I mean, frankly, I don't see much difference. I think there is a difference between, I mean, in my EGLUS program, I see a difference in really Africa, you know, maybe part of India, but the emerging countries are often as advanced as us, or sometimes more advanced. Okay, and by the way, it's the same technology. There's no big difference in technology. It's the same challenges. Same challenges of decarbonization, same challenges of efficiency, of resilience, things like that. It's very often the same companies. They just come under different names. These infrastructure operators are the same companies worldwide. So I think intellectually, it's the same kind of framework. Of course, different cities have different challenges, more particular. But I see more, I wouldn't call it challenges. I would call it, there are different sensitivities, you know. I'm very, if we do something in India, there is, or in Latin America, there is much more concern about citizen participation, social issues, things like that. If you go to Asia, China, Korea, it's all about efficiency, things like that. And then in Europe, I'm not sure what Europe, it's always about getting something at the European level, but I don't see these huge differences, frankly. But maybe it's my bias. I use speakers from all over the world to illustrate the problems. And sometimes, you know, you can have a very good speaker from Africa illustrating things which we could learn from something.
Thank you. So we have a question from Olivia. She asks, can you use this to frame an innovation system? And by this, I guess it meant the framework in your page 7 of your presentation.
Mm-hmm. To use it where? I don't understand the question.
The question is, can we use this to frame an innovation system?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I understand the question. It's not really the same approach. No. I think it would need some intellectual twisting. I mean, the innovation systems approach from what, and I had colleagues at EPFL who work with this, you know, you have it at a national level in the sense that what are the ingredients you have to create? You have it at the local or regional level. You know, an ingredient is a university, a startup, a city that collaborates, things like that. But it's not a co-evolution framework. It's but it fits in there. The innovation system fits in there somehow. But I think intellectually it's a different approach. It comes more out of management.
Another question is that, is a digital infrastructure similar to digital twinning? How do you suggest we should approach non-digital transport networks like Indian buses for digitalization?
Aren't they already digitalized? I mean, there is there are several questions here. So digital twin, yes, that's the more recent word. I started to use the word mirroring maybe 20 years ago or something like this. So I think digital twin is the same idea. It's a duplication of the physical at the digital level. Maybe it's a better word. I don't know. Okay, but that's the word that comes now. Now, I think from here, I think there is another interesting element here is, and that's a claim, and that's the claim that with my colleague we make in our book. We basically say the digital layer, that twin, should be looked at like an infrastructure, by analogy to an infrastructure. Okay, this is a little bit how should I, preposterous claim, you know, because people say this is just virtual, you know, it's somewhere in the cloud, things like that. The reason why we argue like this is, and I'll give you two reasons. One is that it operates with the same network effects as the traditional infrastructures. Okay, so it leads to monopolization. It's a two-sided or a multi-sided market, and basically this digital layer is functioning like an infrastructure. Okay, that's one thing. Now, the second thing is, if you look, and I'm coming back to the EU, the way the EU goes at regulating the digital layer, it's very much inspired by their approach to regulating the traditional infrastructures. Okay, so let me just take 1 minute on this. So I talked about trains. It's the best example. The trains, the idea was, the train is vertically integrated. We separate it. There is a physical monopoly of the tracks, and then there is competition among the train companies on these tracks. Okay, we unbundle, we create competition. In the digital layer, they are now doing exactly the same thing. They say we separate this twin into a data layer, the infrastructure, and on this and a services layer that uses the data. Okay, that's their approach to dealing with this digital twin. Why that? You can say because they missed the boat, because the platforms are not European, they are American or Chinese. Okay, so how can we get control over this digital layer again? In Europe, we unbundle it, and we want to create a European-wide data infrastructure. And if you look at the Data Governance Act, that's in there, we have, the EU distinguishes 9 data infrastructures in Europe. And one is for us, one is the mobility data layer, where all the mobility data from everybody, the people, the transport operators, the infrastructure, are in that layer, interoperable, shared among all the countries. Okay, dream. And then there is services providers, platforms that can plug into these data and offer the services. That's they use the same approach. So it's mobility data, energy data layer, financial data layer, education data, research data layer, banking data layer, things like that. That's my. Now, I think the last element of the question was India, buses in India. I'm sure, I don't know, but I'm sure there is an app that connects the buses in India, and that, I mean, works like Flixbus and all these kinds of things. There's no reason why wouldn't that, maybe even more advanced in India than in Germany. So that there is no impediment to this. Actually, great software developers in India. So
thank you very much. So another question is, in order to include externalities, would you go for a carbon tax or carbon certificates trade, or something completely different?
That's at least what the European Commission wants to do, because remember, we are in competition. So there is a carbon market. Okay, if once you get the prices right, then there is a market, and that leads to more efficiency. Why not? Because there is not much alternative to this. Command and control may work in China, but it will not work it will not work in Europe. So I think we have no other alternative than to somehow get into a carbon trading system at the global level, ideally, not just at the EU level. But my answer is a pragmatic answer. It's probably what we can do now. But we should still do public policy. I mean, why do these planes always need to fly around? I mean, is that why do we have to wait until the carbon market will work and we will have less people flying useless flights around? Certain things should just be forbidden, I think. But it will come. It's just a matter of urgency. And to conclude my thought, I think it will take a long time for these carbon markets to work, and the urgency will be such that we will have public policy intervention before that.
So another question is that, Professor Finger, you have considerable amount of experiences. I was reading your CV the other day, and it's impressive. And here in this chat, we have now about 70 attendees. Many of them young researchers are in the beginning of their careers. Mm-hmm. Do you have any hints or tips for them for the future?
Good question. Let me answer by way of a little. I have another project I work. If you go on the website, it's called globalarctic.org. And I was talking to young researchers in the Arctic, and they asked me the same question: what should we do? Now everything is much more dramatic in the Arctic, and I said, you should do research. We need research. We need interdisciplinary research. Don't go just, I know that the academic, and it's easy for me to say at the end of my career, and all that. But, you can make an academic career by being hyper specialized, and that guarantees you some job somewhere in some university, But all the problems we face today are interdisciplinary problems. They are not purely specific problems. And so at least, of course, I understand you have to focus on something, but always look beyond your plate and look at other disciplines and try to link the things together. I think that's the first because at the end, you will also find a job with this. We need things like this. And the second remark I made was, and I think it was valid in the Arctic, but it's valid here. I think it's the end, today is the end of armchair research. I don't want to bother about what's going around me. And, I don't want to know about politics. And we don't have time you have to be somehow, I'm not saying you should do politics. I'm saying you should do something that you think is societally meaningful, and it will always pay off at the end. So I don't know, that would be my recommendations, but and I have tried to do that in my career, but it was not always easy, and the situation was not the same. It's more urgent today.
So we received a lot of messages in text box thanking you for the interesting presentation. Many people are interested to have the PowerPoint.
Sure, no problem. I'll send the latest version, Andrea. I'll send it to you, and you can share it. No problem.
It would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Finger, for a very interesting talk.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. It was a pleasure. I see a few faces, but I like this global approach from different cultures. I think we all face the same problems. Of course, we have particularities. I mean, there is a German context, there's a Swiss context, there's an Indian context, a Latin American context. But as I said, it's the same technologies, it's the same problems, it's the same companies. So, you know, bring your particular angle to it, but don't think it's unique. So thanks again, and best of luck to all of you.
Thank you very much, the same.
Okay.
So I would like to thank Professor Finger and Professor Gericke again for the interesting talks, and also the participants for attending. I hope what you grasped from the presentation assists you in your future research. As I mentioned, I was informed that the next session so far has 15 minutes of delay, so we probably will start at 3:45. In the meantime, you can enter the breakout room, or you can have a short break, and see you in 20 minutes, I would say. Goodbye.